myself. That's fine. I actually get a recording today. Internal microphone, that sounds good. Let's see. Hopefully you guys are checking yourselves in on the attendance list while I'm doing all this. Make sure you do that so I know you're here. And it looks like we're actually up on both screens. This is definitely not the way the system's supposed to work, but like I said, if it's working, go for it. In the upper right-hand corner. Well, welcome. Sorry about the technical glitches, squandering the first 10 minutes of class, but what are you going to do? This is a new room for me and lots of new stuff, and they just installed all this AV equipment all over campus and didn't really train us in how to use the stuff, and I think it actually doesn't work that well, but there you go. It's learning curve everywhere. Great to be here. Good to see you guys again. And this is going to be a fun class because I'm going to have some colleagues, one former student, come towards the end of class, and we're going to do what I think will be a fun exercise outside in the lawn, a systems thinking exercise that part of the challenges I mentioned in this class is I like to do lots of sort of hands-on, sort of stuff in class, and that's not really possible, but we're doing workarounds here, and hopefully we'll have fun doing this outside, and hopefully we'll learn some stuff from it too, because it's pretty cool exercise. I wanted to start the class first by allowing anyone who wishes to reflect on one of the readings. So you had just 2 readings for today. One was like very standard environmental sciencey textbook by Miller talking about, cycles of stuff. And many of you probably are familiar with that, certainly if you had AP. But as I mentioned, this course is really intended to be very interdisciplinary. And what I love about the second reading, which was by a guy named Aldo Leopold, and many of you are probably familiar with, an important figure in the history of sort of environmental thought, I would say, who I think really exemplifies to some extent interdisciplinarity. The guy's trained as a scientist, originally a wildlife ecologist. Interesting note of convergence between Leopold and I. He attended Yale School of Forestry in the early 1900s, and after going to Oberlin College, I went to Yale School of Forestry, so we share that experience. But he went on to found all sorts of important fields of ecology and environmental ethics. So I had to read an essay I love called Odyssey. Anyone have any thoughts? What did it make you think about? Anyone want to share? Just doesn't need to be like a profound conclusion about it. Just like, what did it make you think about? What were you thinking about when you read it? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, let me try here for a name. It starts with an A, is that right? Help me out. Elena, thank you.
So it kind of made me think about how we as humans are the mercy of the elements, and not only do us humans have a natural movement cycle, but also the prairie land and all that does too. But unlike the environment, our legacy doesn't carry on like the phosphorus in the soil. We kind of just end at one moment, and then we have a trade on that cycle or whatever. But it made me think about how the environment has a natural movement cycle.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, the first comment you made sort of emphasized, I think, the anthropomorphism involved in sort of putting yourself in the place of these inanimate objects and thinking about the world. And there is I was just having a long conversation with a fellow researcher at University of Michigan about the power of anthropomorphic thinking and sort of motivating environmental thought. So I'm glad you picked up on that piece of it, but obviously you had a lot of the biogeochemical aspects there too. Any other sort of comments on that, thoughts on that? Yeah, go ahead. Emma? yeah, yeah. We do, obviously, as human beings, we think about things on a human time scale. That's our fundamental, thought process, and it's causing us a lot of problems right now. But the world operates on all sorts of time scales. But you're gonna have to help me out here. Ava. Okay, thank you.
Something that stood out to me was just how connected everything is. Maybe because as we ever end, I think we can look at time out there, but there's so many different life processes that are connected, like in the movement.
Right. Yes, go ahead. Betsy. That's up. Close though.
I personally really enjoyed his use of X. It reminded me a lot of like the X variable that we use in equations. I think that really kind of shows how equations are usually very connected. Like that we solve something and that helps us solve something else in those different equations. And I just thought that really just showed how the environment itself is maybe like a big equation.
Yeah, neat thinking about it that way. And maybe when you first started saying that, I was thinking substitutability. I mean, he's talking about a specific instance, but to some extent, the sort of like framing and storyline in there also has a substitutability. There are many things that are following this pattern, and I think that's actually probably a good link back to making the connections between that story and the subject of our last class, which was laws of matter and energy. Everything about that story, which is a narrative, is sort of like basically a manifestation of the laws of conservation of matter and the laws of thermodynamics, actually. This sort of, this constant cycling, nothing goes away, everything, it moves and it transforms into different kinds of materials, but it's obeying the law of conservation of matter. What is the manifestation in that story? This is a harder thought. What's the manifestation of the second law of thermodynamics that's playing out in atom X? Yeah, Julie? Yeah, and what is the manifestation of that? Yeah, so that atom is exhibiting, I mean, it's receiving, when the sun, fixes energy and it gets absorbed by a plant, it's being incorporated into higher energy forms. But at the end of the day, what's happening to that atom over time? Yeah, no. Yeah, and ultimately they're traveling downhill. They're moving down this gradient of this gravitational gradient and ending up in the ocean at the end. So again, I love it because it's this very humanistic perspective on biogeochemical cycling, and it's respecting both like the reality of science and the way science works, but also the reality of a narrative that can help us to, as human beings, who think about things from a human perspective, help us to sort of get ourselves inside. I can't say get inside the head of an atom because the atom has no head, but help ourselves to understand these processes that obviously we can only understand through the human mind. Yeah, anyway, great thoughts. Clearly you guys got your head really wrapped around that, and I appreciate that level of sort of thinking that everyone who spoke obviously put into that. So I appreciate that. Before we launch into talking a little bit about biogeochemical cycles and human influences on them. By the way, I hope you picked up in that essay too, the way in which human beings were modifying the flow, engaging, whether they be native peoples who lived here or whether they be contemporary people who were plowing the soil, all of them sort of intervening in ways that were modifying the flow, the pathway of flow, and how fast it moved down slope and that sort of thing. All of that was in there too. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about biogeochemistry today. And it'll be a quick overview. What I'm trying to do today is to help you understand how the sort of simple rules, conservation of matter, conservation of energy, second law of thermodynamics that we talked about last week. Really, if you just basically really bury those in your head, a lot of the complexity of the world, at least at a broad level, makes a lot of sense. If you just think, okay, well, everything is just sort of obeying these basic rules. And the complexity of the circulation of the oceans, the way energy flows through the earth, it's all just a manifestation of those three basic principles. That's the basic take-home message for today. You can forget about all sorts of details, but if you can sort of embody these basic system principles about the way the world works, a lot of what is possible, what's impossible, good ways to do things, ways to do things that just in the long term aren't going to work, just becomes sort of apparent. And that's why I put such stress on this. But I want to give you a few details on these next classes. And so let me say a few things about the details first before we launch into that. So I mentioned at the end of class today, a few people are going to join us. So I have a hard cutoff time. I only have 40 minutes to talk to you because then some friends are going to show up and we're going to go outside. So yeah, I'll say more about that when they show up. So as you guys know, you have a feedback causality exercise due today. I've noted that a lot of you are making good progress on that. I haven't really had time to give anyone more comments than I did earlier, but notice people are getting that done. I do still have a couple slots this afternoon in my office hours if you want to sign up. It's a great way to just, chat and get to know each other too. So, I encourage you to sign up for those. They're really easy to sign up for. On the top of the syllabus, there's a link, or in any of the emails I send you at the bottom of those, there's also a link. You just click those and it shows you when I'm available, and you click on a slot and you got it. And I'll send you a little Zoom link, and then we can meet then. So several of you signed up for today, but there's still some slots available. So just a heads up on that. I realized several of you emailed me yesterday, hey, where's the working group survey? I want to fill that out, and I didn't get posted until pretty late. I don't really care if you don't get that done until tomorrow. I want it done before the weekend so I can get you guys set up into groups for next week. But officially it's due today, but since I was late in posting it, I'm fine if you don't get that done by tomorrow. So I mentioned this last class. I just want to remind you, there are several events in the class that take place outside of normal class meeting time. The first of these is on Saturday. We're going to do a field trip. Alas, it'll be on Zoom, but actually it's letting me do some cool things that I've never been able to do before. I mean, I'd rather be in a yellow school bus with you, but yeah, you're going to get a great sense of where our energy, water, and that sort of thing comes from in ways that you would never be able to in the school bus, although the physicality of visiting the spot where your water comes from out of a local river is psychologically important, but that ain't going to happen this semester. So yeah, you'll basically just log on to our normal Zoom meeting time, the calendar online. It's the same Zoom meeting for everything we do in this class has the same Zoom meeting ID. So the ones we used last week, it's the same ID that'll get you into that. And I'll mention this is, I'm not going to talk more about the quiz next week, but I'll just mention you do have a quiz not this weekend, next weekend. And I'll post a practice quiz this weekend just to show you guys out, really. That's the word I'll use. Because it's not that big a deal, but it'll help you figure out how you might study for it. Some words about next week, and I have another slide on the local sustainability roundtable, which is on Tuesday, our next class. There will also be a footprint assignment. I haven't revised that and posted it yet, but it'll be up this weekend. That's due next week. And yeah, I already mentioned the quiz. So any questions on that? Don't ask me detailed questions on the quiz because we'll do that later. But okay, I'll go on. Okay, yeah. So I wanted to talk about our next class, which is going to be a really fun class. We're going to have several guests in here. These are our guests for next class, all people who have important positions in the city of Oberlin. I wish I could get rid of this stupid thing. That's pretty good, isn't it? Okay, so I'll just mention something about these people. Sharon Pearson, someone who has been a collaborator with me, long-term Oberlin resident, born, raised in Oberlin. she'll tell you she was baby Jesus in the play when she was in the school play when she was a little kid. She worked for the city for many years. She was elected to the city council for several terms, so she was part of the governing process in City of Oberlin. She also worked very closely with me on developing the community voices technology, which is something you're going to be working on this semester. Does a lot of work on issues of transportation and environmental justice in this actually in Lorain County as a whole right now. Bridget Flynn is the sustainability coordinator for Oberlin College. So she's the only person who will be on this panel who represents Oberlin College and what we're doing on sustainability there. Greg Jones is the, what's his official title? He's the energy advocate for the city of Oberlin. He works for an organization called Power, providing Oberlin with energy responsibly. And he meets with people in their homes and helps them figure out how they can make their homes more energy efficient, and has a pool of money in this nonprofit organization Power that he can access to help people insulate their homes and install new appliances to make them more energy efficient, with a particularly emphasis on the low income community. Really smart, great, good human being. Linda Arbogast is the sustainability coordinator for the city of Oberlin. And that's a relatively new position, only 2 years old, and we have gotten so much done in this community since she arrived. Really phenomenal person. Linda Slocum is the current chair of Oberlin City Council. So City Council is the governing body for the city of Oberlin, and you can think of the chair of City Council as our equivalent of the mayor of Oberlin. So she's basically the mayor of the city of Oberlin. If something needs to be signed by the mayor, it would be Linda who would sign that. Another very interesting person. So really interesting people. I would like you, there's quite a bit of reading for next class. You may have to skim a little bit of it because it's long, but for instance, you're going to read the Oberlin Climate Action Plan. That's the City of Oberlin's Climate Action Plan. It's 83 pages, but frankly, most of it is pictures. It's very easy reading. And it's a great document. It talks about the commitments and how we're going to fulfill those commitments, and pretty neat. You're going to read the Oberlin College equivalent of that, which is the Environmental Policy Implementation Plan, which is the college's policy on the environment. You're going to read a little introduction to the city of Oberlin by a colleague of mine, David Orr. But I would like you to come, now that you know a little bit about the people who are going to be in front of you, and we'll have them in by Zoom. I'm not allowed to bring them in here. But now that you know a little bit about these folks, I want you to think of questions for them. So I want you to, I've told these folks, let's keep the presentation from you guys as short as we can so we can mostly do Q&A. So this is really your opportunity to learn about the city of Oberlin from some of the movers and shakers on the environmental front within this community. So any questions on that? All right, cool. Let's see if I can get my slides to advance. Let's do that. All right, so I'm going to pick up where we dropped off and then pretty quickly talk a little bit about biogeochemical cycles, and probably won't get as far as I would hope to. But we talked about conservation of matter, we talked about conservation of energy, and we've begun to talk about so conservation of matter. Matter is neither created nor destroyed. First law of thermodynamics, which is the same as conservation of energy. I use those terms totally interchangeably. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. But it's the second law that's really more interesting. And the second law is the one that says that energy quality is always being degraded. We talked about bound versus free energy, which is one way to look at it, lots of different ways to look at it. But the bottom line is anytime you convert energy from one form to another, you lose useful energy. It means you can't recycle energy. Like people talk about, recycling matter. You have to recycle matter. You can't recycle energy because energy is being degraded. You can use energy more efficiently, get more done with the same amount of energy, but you can't, there's no perpetual motion machine with energy. If we, and by we I mean the Earth, didn't have a continuous source of high quality energy flowing into us, AKA the sun, we would just grind down to a halt because of the second law of thermodynamics, because we use up all the useful energy and we just sort of reaching a chemical equilibrium, which is would be dead. Everything would be dead, and at its lowest energy form there. The only way we function is through this inflow of sunlight, and of course, we've been running the economy not on immediate sunlight, but on the ancient sunlight trapped within fossil fuels. But we're still running it on the energy that flowed into the earth. We're just running it on energy that flowed into the earth billions of years ago. But it's still sunlight. It's just sunlight through fossil fuels that we're running it on now. You know, obviously we got to transition to running it on the immediate flow of sunlight that's coming into the planet right now. But at the end of the day, that sunlight comes in and we degrade it to less useful forms of energy. What's the least useful form of energy? The lowest grade form of energy. Go ahead, Larissa, I can see you want to say something. I can see that. What's that? Bound energy. And let's get more specific. What's the most common bound energy? What are you guys doing right now? Right now, you are digesting, hopefully you ate breakfast. It's good to eat breakfast. Hopefully you are digesting that food. And at the end of the day, what's happening to that energy, that food energy in your body? Where's it going right now? Yes, each of you is like a 100-watt light bulb right now, pretty much like a 100-watt light bulb. Depends on how energetic you are right now. Some of you are releasing more heat than others. But you are basically, all you're doing right now from a thermodynamic point of view is you're taking chemical energy, you're turning it into other kinds of chemical energy, then into kinetic energy, and then into heat. Each of you is basically, from a thermodynamic perspective, you are nothing more than a 100-watt light bulb right now, emitting heat into this room. That's what you're doing right now. And that's just a manifestation of the second law. Because you're transforming energy from one kind to another, you're degrading it. The lowest form of energy is heat. The heat's going out into this room. It'll escape from the room, go out into the world at large. Eventually, it'll escape out into the solar system. It'll just dissipate off the Earth. It'll do that. And so the second law, useful energy in, always greater than useful energy out, because we're always degrading it. And this plays out at every sort of scale. It's going on with the Earth as a whole. And at every system level, if you look at ecosystems, if you look at individual organisms, we're all doing the same thing. We're receiving high quality energy, doing various things with it, and then ultimately degrading it to heat. So normally I do a physical model right now, and it's a cool one. I'd have 10 of you sit down in the front row here, and I would pour water into someone's hand here, and you guys would pass it down in a row. And I'd collect water at the end of this row here. And what would happen to that water? And I would call this water sunlight. I'd say, here, I'm putting sunlight into the system at this end, and it's going through all these transformations. And then I'd measure what comes out at the end. What would you see in that situation? What would you see, Emma? Right, you'd be spilling water at every step. It's just an analogy for how energy works. You just can't. There's no 100% efficient. You can get better. Some people are much better than others at moving the water. They're more efficient at moving the water, but they're all, minimally, it's getting on their hands, even if they were perfect at transporting it. And it's evaporating, it's disappearing. At every stage, we're losing useful stuff there. Can't do that one today, though. All right. So some implications. Energy is always being degraded. Nothing's 100% energy efficient, can't be. We can improve the efficiency. And by the way, efficiency is useful output per useful input. So that's the concept of efficiency is a really important term, and people apply it in really different ways. And so it's kind of important to know what useful thing are they talking about, because sometimes people will say, well, modern agriculture, for instance, is very efficient. You create a lot of food per unit of people working the land, or per unit of land. And those can be true statements with respect to its efficiency. But it depends on how you're defining efficiency in that context, whether it's efficient or not. High quality energy can't be recycled. I said that. These are basically reiterations. This is an important one which relates back to the Cadillac analogy. The more energy we use, the more disorder or entropy we create. This is a really, really important thing, because I think there's certainly a strand of environmentalism which says we don't really need to cut back on anything. We just need to figure out how to capture the energy from the sun transition the economy to running on solar energy. And we don't really need to do anything differently except change the input, get an input that is not burning fossil fuels. It's just a wind, sun, and just keep on doing everything we're doing, go about our normal business. The reality is that it's better to use less energy than it is to use renewable energy. Renewable energy is great stuff. We need to run the economy on renewable energy. But the first thing to do in most situations, if you want to improve environmental quality, is to use less. Not to figure out a renewable source of the stuff you're using, but to just use less. And that, again, is just a principle that comes right out of these basic principles. If you use less, there's all sorts of problems with renewable energy. It's like, it's the only, we have to transition to renewable energy. But when you talk about storing lots of energy in batteries or building big wind turbines, solar, all sorts of issues, as I'm sure you guys are well aware about, rare metals you're using, toxic stuff you're using in making it. We have to do it. We have no choice but to go renewable. But the less energy we use, the better in terms of environmental impact. It's always better to use less first and then figure out how you can use renewable energy. All right. So there are some apparent contradictions here, and I want to make sure we address these contradictions so that they don't cause you too much cognitive dissonance. And the contradictions actually, when people were thinking about, when they were discovering, let's say, the second law of thermodynamics and really beginning to understand the sort of biology of life, there was, some potentially contrasting thoughts here. So this guy Carnot, he was important in kind of elucidating, let's use that word, elucidating the second law of thermodynamics. This idea that disorder is increasing in the universe, everything tends towards disorder. And then at the same time, you've got Darwin and other people who are sort of like basically studying the emergence, the development of this incredibly beautiful complexity on this planet and no other planet we've discovered called life. We are incredibly ordered and, some people, how you want to say it, but we're beautiful. We are beautiful. Human beings, organisms, it's beautiful. It's this incredible complexity that has been generated from gas in the atmosphere. And wow. We created this incredible ordered complexity. And so you might ask yourself the question, well, isn't that just straight up a violation of the second law of thermodynamics, which says that the universe is tending towards disorder? How do we develop what is objectively an incredibly ordered, high energy? We're full of good energy material. We're made of protein and carbohydrates and fats and all this sort of very, very high energy molecules. How is it the case that we have this great order when there's this general principle that we found no exceptions to the second law, and that law says that the disorder of the universe is increasing? How's that possible? How's that work? Someone who hasn't spoken yet, maybe, who wants to give this a shot. How do we develop this incredible order when we know that as a whole, the universe is tending towards disorder because of the second law? How's that not a contradiction? Yeah, go ahead. Well, you've got two things in what you're saying. On one hand, you're saying it's temporary. On the other, you're saying the system as a whole. I like the second part of your statement, which is the system as a whole. Because you can maintain order indefinitely as long as what? What is necessary to maintain a high degree of order within the system? What is the necessary ingredient for maintaining order within a system? What do you need to do that? Yes. Well, you have disorder. That you will be generating disorder with that order, but what do you need? Any system that's going to maintain order. Yes. What's your name? Adriana, right. Adriana, what's up? You have to do work on the system. Say that another way. Yes, absolutely. You have to do work on the system. That's it. You need to have a source of low entropy, and to translate that, you need an energy inflow. As soon as you can maintain a high degree of order in a system as long as it's an open system. And that is, you have a through flow of high quality energy. Without that through flow of energy, exactly what I said about the Earth. The only reason we have this incredible beauty and order on this planet is because we have this continuous through flow of solar energy, which is enabling us. So we have a lot of energy flowing through. As that energy flows through, we degrade it, but we can use that flowing energy to create a great deal of order. If you look at the universe as a whole, the entropy is increasing. But within our system, as long as we have that through flow of energy, we can build order. But that order is contingent on a through flow of energy and a degradation of that high quality energy. So that's the bottom line. Really important to sort of have that as sort of a basic understanding of the way things work. This planet runs on an external energy source outside of us called the sun. That's what we run on. That's what we've always run on. That's what we will run on. It's a question of how we run on that. Are we running on ancient sunlight, or are we running on current sunlight? That's our source of energy. That's what we got. It's not a contradiction that life exists. And this is a comment actually one of you just made, which is, you said it a little bit differently, but life is basically tiny little pockets of order, low entropy, that's maintained by creating a sea of disorder. And that sea of disorder is, we got energy flowing through us and we're degrading it. You guys are emitting heat right now. That's what you're doing. Your order is maintained because you ate food. That food ultimately came from sunlight. Everything that is the food you ate was sunlight once. Every bit of it was sunlight flowing through the earth as a whole. It went through a bunch of transformations. Maybe it went through plants. Maybe it went through plants and then through animals. But it's sunlight that you are using right now and emitting as heat, degrading to low quality heat. That's what you're doing right now. You may have thought you were doing other things, but from a thermodynamic perspective, that's kind of all you're doing right now. Hopefully there's all this other stuff going on in your head right now, but thermodynamically, you're emitting heat right now. Okay, so bottom line, and I've said this a bunch of times, we're all contingent on that through flow of heat. We may be cycling material, as you see in the right-hand diagram there, you know, and we do that energy flowing through us allows us to cycle materials, but there's heat flowing out at every step in that cycle of, the cycle of materials involves dissipation of heat every time anything's converted from one form to another form. And we're losing useful energy at every step in this. All right, so if we think about sort of budget models, we talked about budget models of stuff, whether it's matter or energy, other kinds of stuff, money you can think about too, but we're interested in matter and energy. If you think about energy budgets, you can think about two currencies, total energy and useful energy. We talk about a system, stuff flows in, stuff flows out, stuff moves around within the system. For total energy, the first law says the total energy in is equal to the total energy out. The second law is saying that useful energy in is greater than useful energy out. So total energy is conserved, useful energy is necessarily degraded because there's heat coming out the whole way. Lots of different ways of thinking about this. Very good explanation of a lot of what goes on in ecology. And maybe I'll take a little aside here and talk about vegetarianism for a moment. How many of you are vegetarians? Let's see a show of hands here. Good for you. There are many reasons why one might be a vegetarian. And how many of you would say those of you who raise your hands and are vegetarians, how many of you would say you're vegetarians principally for ethical reasons related to the conditions of animals? Okay, great. That's very often a motivator for people who are vegetarians. There's an entirely energetic reason to be a vegetarian. Forget about whether you care about, you know, cruelty to animals or not. Argue vegetarianism from a thermodynamic standpoint for a moment. Who wants to give that a shot? Maybe someone who hasn't said anything yet. Go ahead, Madison.
You are able to then feed a bunch of people with food and have a lot more useful energy that can then be put to work feeding other people instead of feeding animals that are then fed to hunger.
Absolutely, because putting it through an animal, and there's some caveats to this argument, but the argument makes a lot of sense from a thermodynamic standpoint, because if you put the energy through an animal, the animal is losing a lot of heat energy and there's less energy coming out the tail end. There's less energy in the harvested animal than there is in the grain that went into the animal or the food that went into the animal. It gets a lot more complex than that because there are certain situations on the planet where basically human beings are incapable of eating the plant material that would grow in a certain environment, and there are animals that can eat that. And so the animals are actually converting a form of energy that's not accessible to human beings into a form of energy that is accessible. Great example of that is Mongolia. They can't really grow a whole lot of crops there. They can grow, grass and stuff. Sheep can eat the grass. They can eat the sheep. It's a culture that's basically based on that system where the landscape itself will not support food that will support humans. So in that case, the only way to get the sunlight flowing into human beings is through animals naturally. So, there's some complexity to it, but the bottom line of what Madison said from a thermodynamic standpoint is very, very straight up. And so you've got these different feeding levels, and the amount of energy that flows through each feeding level as you go up these trophic levels, so to speak, is reduced at each level because you've lost useful energy. Some animals are much more efficient at converting what they're fed into meat, the energy we would eat from them, than others. A chicken is vastly more efficient, for instance, than a cow taking grain. So if you're going to eat meat and you're concerned about energy and the amount of embodied solar energy in your food, it makes a lot of difference what you're eating. There's huge differences in terms of its impact thermodynamically. Anyway, just let me say. All right, so we've got the solar system. We've got this big sun, which emits energy. We all receive that energy. All the planets in the solar system are essentially, from a gross thermodynamic standpoint, doing the same thing. They're taking in high quality energy from the sun and they're degrading it into low quality heat. That's what they do. And those little wavelengths there are to indicate that, in fact, we receive radiation. We receive energy in the form of radiation, light energy from the sun, short wavelength radiation, visible light mostly, and we degrade it into long wavelength radiation heat. That's why all my little pictures have short and long little zigzag lines to sort of reflect that. That red wide one is broadband. We emit heat out into the planet. That's what we do. All the planets do that. So here's the Earth. We get our energy. We use that energy to cycle matter within us, and then in the process, we emit this heat out into the atmosphere. Ecosystems are doing that too. A little bit different than the Earth as a whole, in the sense that ecosystems typically are not fully materially closed. So they're receiving some material from upstream ecosystems and losing material to downstream ecosystems. Think Atom X there for a moment. Showing these sort of trophic levels of energy flowing through systems. Human beings are, we can't directly run on solar energy. We are not photosynthetic organisms, but we're extracting energy from crops, which are harvesting the energy from the sun. Maybe it passes through animals, goes into our body, and we're emitting our waste out into the surrounding ecosystems. We're internally recycling materials as well, but we have a lot of through flow of materials. We go to the bathroom, we put food in our mouth and go to the bathroom. Already shown that one. Different societies use very different amounts of energy to support a human being. And I hate the fact that the graphic, I still use the word primitive because I think that's such a wrong word to use there. But early peoples didn't need a whole lot of energy to run human society, because we are not only eating food, but turning on all the lights here, using all the transportation to move our food around and move us around and everything else. We're using massive amounts of, sorry about me being here, I'll figure out this projector eventually, but we're using vastly more energy to support calories of energy used to support a person per day than did our ancient ancestors or people living in many other cultures. All right, so this energy comes into the Earth and from the sun. A lot of it is just reflected out. A lot of it is sort of straight up absorbed by the Earth and degraded to heat. On the way, It's doing things like evaporating water, generating the wind. So wind energy is really just solar energy. A tiny, tiny little bit of it is going into photosynthesis, which is really important to us because that photosynthesis is transforming CO2 from the atmosphere into organic matter and changing the chemical composition of the atmosphere. And that change in the chemical composition of the atmosphere affects the way energy flows through the system. So it's a very sophisticated and complex feedback system where tiny little bits, again, leverage points. We talked about leverage points with meadows. Photosynthesis, tiny fraction of the energy coming in, but huge impact on the evolution of the Earth. Everything about our planet today has to do with this tiny little bit of photosynthesis that's been going on for billions of years on our planet and how it has transformed our planet from one in which there used to be a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere and it used to be really hot on this planet to one that's much cooler because CO2, as you know, is a greenhouse gas. It blocks the heat from escaping from the Earth. And so if you have a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere, you trap heat from escaping from the Earth. If you have less CO2 in the atmosphere, it's more free to escape, right? So when it's degraded to heat, it can get out easier if there's less CO2 in the atmosphere. So all of these things, climate change, it all is pretty straight up when you start thinking about it from these basic system level principles here. You guys know we're on an angle and we spin around the sun and that gives us seasons and that sort of thing. Pretty straight up stuff. It's important because the Earth unequally receives energy from the sun, and because of that, we receive more energy at the equator, which is pointed towards the sun more than the other parts, at least on average over the course of the year. In the summer in the northern hemisphere, we're pointed more at the sun. We get lots of sun. Same deal with the southern hemisphere, the other half of the year. But the bottom line is Earth is energy is unequally received in different parts of the Earth. So the Earth as a biophysical system is dissipating, is figuring out how to spread that energy. Energy is going to flow. Remember, one of the statements of the second law of thermodynamics is that energy flows from where it's hot to where it's cool. So that drives all of our weather systems. Our weather systems are simply a manifestation of energy dissipation in the second law of thermodynamics. And I'm not going to go into the details of global circulation here, but global circulation is nothing more than the Earth exhibiting the second law of thermodynamics, taking heat, which is unequally distributed at the equator, sending it polewards in the air and in the water. So the flow of air masses, the weather we experience, the water flows, the circulation, all of that is just the Earth responding as a biophysical system to unequal distribution of heat and trying to dissipate it towards the poles and then get it into outer space, which is what we ultimately do. So airflow, water flow, it's all just a manifestation of the Earth dissipating energy. And global climate change is really nothing more than the Earth adjusting to the fact that it's harder to dissipate energy now because of this blanket of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. All of what, I had you read something by author for the first day, doing the name lapse here, famous energy person. Anyone remember? You get an extra point if you remember. The energy guy in the first reading. Just doing a name lapse here. What? No, not Anton, that's close though. He's like the major energy guru. What? It was the video thing. Why am I doing a name lapse? I know this guy actually. Lovins, Amory Lovins, right. Weird dude, he's giving me a back rub in the weirdest of ways, very odd man. But at any rate, he calls it global weirding because that's what it is, where it's like changing the nature in which energy can flow out of the planet. And by changing the nature of energy flow, all of our weather patterns end up getting changed as a result of that. But like I say, it's just a manifestation of the second law. It's the second law playing out with new constraints. We've changed the system is adjusting to that new constraint. Water flowing to the surface. We're messing with all of this stuff because we're messing with the way energy can flow through the earth. So I already talked about kind of the trophic transfer efficiency when we were talking about vegetarianism, the sort of movement of energy through organisms, through feeding levels, trophic levels. It's well discussed in the basic environmental text. So I've already mentioned part of this sort of influence of human beings has to do with changing scales. It used to be, again, this is, if you think about that Adam X thing, when he's talking about native peoples and their interactions with Adam X, pretty local, whereas when you start talking about the plow and modern human beings, you start shifting to regional scale effects of human beings. At this point, human beings essentially, for better or worse, for intention or unintention, basically control the biogeochemistry of the planet at this point. We control the material cycles, we control the energy flow. And, you know, again, most of it, we don't really want to be doing this. It's just, it's what we're doing. So when you think about all the cycling of important elements, I talked about those bioelements, carbon, phosphorus, nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, they're all influenced by human beings. I do, well, that's what's going to happen is that Rowan and Harriet are going to come in that door. And as soon as they come in that door, that will be my cutoff. Yeah. Right, well, it's pretty straight up physics. When heat gets absorbed by a hard surface, so a surface is absorbing heat energy, that light energy gets converted into heat energy. It changes from visible light to infrared energy, which is then going to go out of the system. That infrared energy, because it's heating the surface, is going to cause air masses to rise together with. So as it heats, it rises. And I had up there for a second, you know, the whole sort of Hadley cells, the circulation. Hey, Rowan, how are you doing? Good to see you. Is Harriet's not here yet, right? Oh, you're both here. Oh, okay. So that is my my signal to bail, and of course I got not nearly as far as I wanted to. But I will say, just to wrap this up, and maybe I'll try to get back to this next Thursday. The basic environmental science reading for today does a pretty good job of explaining these basic cycles, and it's important context for you to know. In some ways, since some of you come into the course with either AP environmental science or a good environmental science course in high school, hopefully most of you have some basis for that. For those of you who do not, ask questions of me if you don't understand what's in that basic reading, because it's pretty straight up. But I think the sort of big overview I've given you of the rules are really the thing to keep in mind as you read and try to understand that. So let me explain a little bit about how today's exercise is going to work. And I would like to introduce two guests to the class. And it's good that you're packing up. Try to do it quietly because we're going to leave the classroom and you won't come back here. So you do want to take your stuff with you when you leave, and maybe I'll escape and stuff. Shut my computer down now. But Ron, maybe you can come in over there, and Harriet, you can come over here, and I'll do a very quick introduction to you before we leave this this building. Okay. So Ron, do you want to say a quick who you are for a second here?